Hi, everyone. So that was a terrific presentation from Sam. Now, this one I have been particularly looking forward to. So, Fiona, pop on your camera and Mike and join me up here. When I reached out, someone recommended that I get in touch with Fiona, and we started talking about what she was going to present on. And then the synopsis came in, and she said she was going to set it to music, a journey through employment, brand, and music. So I've been just a touch excited about this. If any of you ever presented our events, be as creative as you can. We are not for the very corporate presentations. So Fiona Byarugaba is the strategic employment brand person with Thoughtworks, and she's all about how to attract and retain top technology challenge, which is a major issue for us at the moment. So she's an employment brand professional. She has 15 years of experience, and she sees herself driving and delivering the initiatives with a very strong D&I focus. So that also makes you one of my top favourite people, Fiona. I'm going to turn myself off and hand over to you.
Thank you. Before you go, I might ask you to confirm whether you can see my screen. So can you see my screen?
I can't at the moment. Michelle can. Yes, it's come up now. Fiona, you're good to go. Absolutely beautiful.
Awesome. All right, I will kick off. So thank you for that lovely introduction, Andrea, and for pronouncing my name well. I don't always get that, so appreciate you doing that. Hello, everyone. My name is Fiona Byarugaba. I am the employer brand lead and diversity, equity, and inclusion lead for Thoughtworks in Australia. I've worked across several countries in many different functions, including call centers, communications, even cabin crew and marketing, which is how my career led me here. You could say the roles that I've had over the years have largely involved working closely with the customer or the people experience, which is where I feel like I thrive best. Um, Before I dive into my presentation, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. If you're watching this talk and are unfamiliar with what an acknowledgement of country is, it's an acknowledgement that the land I am on was stolen and never ceded. So today I acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, wherever everyone in this session in Brisbane, where I am, that is the Turrbal and Jagera people, and I recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. All right, so let's dive in. I am here today to speak to you about how to build a strong employer brand, taking some lessons from music, but I think perhaps the most pertinent question before I get into any of that is, what is employer branding? It means different things to different people. I read somewhere, I think in James's abstract for his talk, if you ask 10 people for a definition of employer branding, they'll give you 11. And I agree with him. Over the years, it's been hard for me to find one that, hits the nail on the head for me. But perhaps the one that I feel best embodies the meaning and, is simple, easily articulated and easy to understand is James Ellis's. It simply says, an employer brand is what an individual perceives it would be like to work at your company. Short, sweet, easy to understand. So why music? I've had a couple of people asking me, how are you going to make the connection with music and employer branding, and why did you choose music? And my response a lot of the time has been, why not music? I thought it would be fun. I think at work we take so many things seriously because of how important the work we're doing is. But I thought it would be nice to, add a light-hearted element to this presentation. I wanted to share what I've learned over time with something that I enjoy, which in this case is music. Um, I'm in no way a music connoisseur. Just a girl who enjoys the many facets of music. So I will be talking about orchestras and movie soundtracks and music genres and quotes from artists, just music in all of its glory without, focusing on anything specific. Um, I feel like uh, our mental health as a collective has never been this bad. And music also plays a really great part in healing some of those traumas that many of us have been experiencing, be it through the loss of a loved one or a particularly difficult or challenging time that you've experienced, or even happy times. Um, I think part of why I was also motivated to speak about music today is because there are various studies that have shown that when we listen to music, our brains release dopamine, which makes us happy. Who doesn't love music, right? It is also universal. It's a language of emotion in that it represents different feelings at different times and it barges into your soul with no boundaries or limitations. If you really, really think about it, I think you'll probably agree that music also feels like an audio hug. It almost always makes everything better. So, what's the connection to employer branding? As I had said before, I dabble between both worlds quite a lot. I've learned that great music is kind of like the right employer branding. So, when the employee experience matches the brand promise, then I think you've nailed employer branding. So today, I will be talking and sharing a few lessons, but I think the important question to ask as well is why should organizations care? And I, I think it's important for organizations to care because your employer brand is written on the faces of the people you meet who ask you, what's it like working at X company? Or it's present in the glorious or sometimes gory detail of Glassdoor reviews. It's embedded in the energy or malaise of your everyday working environment. It's your reputation as an employer. When your whether your organization's work environment is distinctively great or generically mediocre or exceptionally bad, you have a reputation as an employer. So once you know that, it's really important to figure out what to do with that information and how to harness it so that it represents you in a way that you want it to. So the lessons today that I will be sharing are just 4 lessons. Lesson 1 is around it takes an orchestra to create a symphony. Lesson 2 is establish your soundtrack. The third lesson is delight the fans. And I think the very last one for today will be around how music genres make all of the difference in your musical experience. So let's dive right in. It takes an orchestra to create a symphony. If you don't know what an orchestra is, it's a group of musicians. It's a particular kind of ensemble led by a conductor who typically comprises with the 4 chief segments of Western classical instruments. So, like string instruments, brass instruments, wind instruments, or percussion instruments. Um, these instruments on their own at any time, I do not disagree, can deliver a very good performance. But if you brought them together, it would make a world of difference. It's kind of like the way I see these instruments is the way I see is similar to siloed teams that we have in the working environment. A lot of the time, you find teams or various functions which are quite strong on their own, really big powerhouses. And typically that's your HR teams or people teams, and they do a great job on their own. They just don't talk to each other enough. And what I've learned whilst doing this work is that iteration continuously improves teamwork. If you just have the functions talking to each other to understand what each other's pain points are, what their challenges are, because ultimately you all have one vision. You're working under the same umbrella, trying to achieve a common goal. It wouldn't then make sense for you to continue operating in silos. Effective employer branding requires close collaboration between different functions. And in some organizations, maybe it might not look like this for you. That's not to say these aren't functions that take care of the people experience don't exist. So you need to understand what those are and, how essential it is that everyone is clear and committed to the same strategic objectives. It includes an understanding of how the employer branding strategy supports the overall organizational strategy and the implications of the employer brand strategy to HR teams, marketing teams, and leadership as well. It's also important to establish key performance indicators, which are specific, concrete objectives expressed in terms of quantities and timelines. Similarly, measurable goals are important because they enable managers and employees to evaluate progress. So a few things and a few ways you can achieve these sorts of clarity is by, open collaboration. And in many organizations, the biggest stakeholders are usually the recruitment teams because you're trying to bring in talent. So maybe that's a team you want to be meeting a bit more regularly than the others. It's marketing teams, it's human resource teams, it's leadership teams, but it's also in some cases diversity, equity, and inclusion affinity groups, because a lot of organizations are starting to take that seriously. And so they're building up teams within the organization who are also plugged into what's really happening with teams on a whole. So it's really important to create effective stakeholder management and communication skills, in addition to agreeing to specific employer branding objectives. You will need to win the support and investment for the plan of action from your leadership teams before you can deliver on these objectives. So if I take it back to the music just a bit, this is my way of saying teams create great symphonies when they collaborate. But a lot of the time, people don't understand the importance of doing it. So if you just start talking to each other, it makes a world of difference. And it might be hard at first to break the ice, but once you start, keep going no matter what. And I like this quote by Beyonce that says, that demonstrates how she's kept going and going throughout her career journey. All right, so that's lesson 1. Moving into lesson 2, establish your soundtrack. If you're into movies and shows, or movies like the James Bond series or the franchise, you'll know that Monty Norman, who created the James Bond theme almost 60 years ago, it's still very relevant right now, even for the franchise. And when it's time to release a new James Bond song, you sort of have that earworm. You're constantly imagining the song playing before you watch it. And it's become such a household name that it's something that everyone who watches James Bond movies recognizes. And that's whether you associate James Bond with Sean Connery or Pierce Brosnan or Daniel Craig even. You just know Bond. James Bond. It's now one of the most recognizable pieces of music in the history of cinema. Aside from that one, there's also Game of Thrones. If you are a Game of Thrones fan, And towards the last season, there was just a flurry of an earworm of this theme song. There were GIFs and themes and all sorts of things going on the internet about it. This one is also known as a Game of Thrones theme, and it was composed by Ramin Djawadi in 2011. When you listen to the song, the feeling that's evoked it's very dark and it's moody, but also beautiful and emotional at the same time. It's perfect for the show if you watch it, because it's such a dark show. Obviously, because all of those families have there are very many problems. But let's come back to reality just a bit. What is your organization's soundtrack? And I don't mean from a musical perspective. I mean, do you have an employee value proposition? Do you even know what that means? Have you spoken about it with your teams and your leadership? In very simple terms, an employee value proposition is the balance of rewards and benefits that an employee receives in return for what they contribute in the workplace. So it's important to create a distinct employee value proposition, because while you are in the process of creating and defining or refreshing one, if you have one and you want to change it, it's often the main focus when setting out an employer brand strategy. It's very different from your strategic objectives. So please remember that they're not one and the same, totally separate. The objectives should follow your analysis of organizational talent needs and the current status of your employer brand, and should inform your development, not follow it. While it might be generally understood that you need to recruit the right talent to support the organization's performance goals, it doesn't always mean that senior teams, potentially even senior HR teams, understand the potential role that effective employer value propositions can play in attracting and engaging and retaining the right talent. So it's good to really think through those, because they clarify the give and get of the employment deal. So a few tips to keep in mind if you want to create a strong employer value proposition. Are you connecting the things your core target audience is interested in? Does your employer value proposition reflect the reality of your employee experience? What are the strengths of working in your organization, but also what are the stretch goals that you have for continuously refining that employee experience? Is it differentiated from what else is in the market? What are your purpose, your values, your careers, performance, teamwork? Are any of those things highlighted? In terms of differentiation, how are you doing the same things innovatively? How are you driving preference through differentiation? As an example, if was to pick music platforms, why do some people prefer Apple Music or Spotify or Pandora or SoundCloud for some? Or if I was thinking about headphones, why would I pick Bose over Sony over Beats by Dre, or even Apple AirPods as an example? What is it about those products, those experiences that speaks to different types of audiences? And then, is it sustainable? Where is the leadership team taking the organization? Do you know what an aspirational state looks like? What's the longer term plan for the organization? How are you embedding that into the employer value proposition? It seems a little bit insurmountable if you don't have an employee value proposition, and if you're not sure where to begin. But with enough research, collaboration, and dedication, I think it is possible. I like this quote by Coldplay, where essentially they're saying, still believe in magic. So I think it is very much possible. So if we were to move to lesson 3, delight the fans, I thought the best example to share here was the one around the wrapped playlists that come out at the end of every year to Spotify listeners. So if you listen to Spotify, if that's your go-to platform and that's where you get your music, you'll know that at the end of every year they do Wrapped playlists for listeners, and Wrapped is basically a deep dive into the artists, songs, podcasts that defined your year. Uh, they're playlists that Spotify creates based on the top songs you've listened to throughout the year. The more you listen, the better your Wrapped will be when they launch it later in the year, which is typically December timeframe. It's basically like the story of your year with Spotify. And in 2020, when I was looking at my Wrapped playlist, I found it quite interesting because it was also the year where the world sort of stopped when the George Floyd murder happened in June. And I could tell from listening to my Wrapped 2020 playlist what time of the year that was because of the kind of music that I was listening to. And it's just interesting to see your life through the lens of your musical choices, I suppose. The interesting thing about Spotify is that they don't limit this experience to just the end of the year. They've also mastered a fantastic way to keep various touch points throughout the listening experience for listeners. And they make all sorts of different types of playlists. And this is just tip of the iceberg. There's many, many more. But these playlists are based on your listening habits, what you like, what you share, what you save, what you skip if you don't like it, and the listening habits of others with similar tastes, and start to create these playlists which are refreshed every now and then. So if I was to bringing it back to employer branding, the question that I wanted to ask is, what is your employee experience? And I don't just ask that question to you as professionals, looking to improve the employee experience. I also ask you as an employee, what's your experience as an employee? Do you enjoy working where you work? Are you enjoying the teams that you're working with, the experience in general? As a professional, are you plugged into really what's happening with your team? A couple of other questions that you could ask is, what's the employee sentiment? Are employees engaged? Do they feel appreciated when they do great things? Do leadership teams let them know about the value that they're adding? What are their career growth trajectories? And what's post-pandemic adjustment been like? It's almost 2 years since we were hit with the pandemic, and lots of organizations have had to pivot how they work in terms of flexible working, and just allowing for remote work. But yeah, it just opens up your mind to the way the world of work has changed. And I guess the question for most professionals today is, how are you pivoting your organization to suit the needs of your employees? Do you recognize employees? Do you have policies that support flexible work? And maybe they don't even need to be formal policies. Do teams know that they're welcome to work from home if they can't come in due to so many reasons? Sometimes government regulations because of lockdowns, but also the flexibility that you as an employer give them. There's always ways we can leverage what we know about the human condition and find ways to make it better, because we spend a lot of our time at work. And so, the onus is on us, I think, more today than ever, to ensure that we provide that experience, an experience that employees will enjoy and, want to keep coming back. So our last lesson for today is, music genres make all the difference. And I like music genres because what they do is improve our experience with music in general. They increase our comprehension of music, recognition of innovative artists, and perhaps most importantly, enhance our enjoyment of music on a personal level. I enjoy many genres of music. I like rock, I like Kings of Leon, I like Coldplay, I enjoy The Script. However, I don't get the same experience from rock as I would if I was listening to Jhené Aiko or Jasmine Sullivan or And that's also different from when I listen to Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. or Kendrick Lamar or Jay-Z. Worlds different, worlds apart from musicians that I also love and enjoy, like Billie Eilish or Imogen Heap or Burna Boy from West Africa, Miriam Makeba from South Africa, Shiba Karunji from Uganda. So I guess when I was thinking about how to bring this, make it relevant for the audience today, I wanted to find out what Australians like to listen to in general, and I, searched the internet and found some research. And the question was, in general, which of the following genres, shows, or podcasts do you listen to via digital music services? It was released in August 2021 across all of Australia. The sample space was about 1,800 people, so not very big, but still interesting. And the age group was about 18 years to 64 years. And as you can see there, some people don't know what genres they enjoy. Others are mostly into pop or contemporary music. There's some who are into comedy, documentary music even. I just found that really interesting to share with you today. But if I wanted to consider another demographic, I would start by saying a lot of the times when people listen to African music, they assume it's all Afro beats music, which is really cool because the beat is quite, it's easy to pick up and learn and enjoy. But that's just from one part of Africa, which is West Africa. Today, I thought I'd take you on a really quick journey and start from South Africa, where we have South African jazz, mostly authored by South African father Hugh Masekela. It doesn't stop there. When you move up to Congo, Brazzaville, there's what we call soukous music, and that was largely started by a musician called Awilo Longoma. If you move towards the Afro beats, which is what I was talking about earlier, at Ghana and Nigeria, you'll see that Fela Kuti, who influences many, many African musicians today, was the father of Afrobeats, and he did a really good job because to this day we still enjoy it. Moving on to the north side of Ethiopia, which we call Ethio Jazz. It was started by Mulatu Atsatske, and a lot of the music is Amharic, and I don't understand Amharic, but it is interesting and quite distinct if you listen to some of it. Finally, where I'm from, which is Uganda, we have what we call Chidandali. A lot of the music is quite attuned to the population and largely performed and delivered beautifully by a band called Afrigo Band. Still together today, have been for a long time. I mean, my parents enjoyed Afrigo, and I enjoy Afrigo too because of the great music that they put together. So let me bring us back to employer branding. If I was to talk about genres, in my mind, I see it as diversity. There's so many areas of diversity that organizations are trying to get better at, but I also think in the process, they get lost because there's just so much to do and so much information that's out there and so many areas and problems to solve. Don't misunderstand me. I think it's good to start somewhere. Sadly, what this has also resulted in is the performative nature of it. Some organizations are doing it to tick a box, to align to regulations or to this or to that or to the other. We've made strides in some of these areas, and in others, we have a really, really long way to go. This slide just reflects my own observations, of course, because I'm heavily involved in this work. Let's see what support for inclusion in the Australian workforce is. So I did a bit of digging and I found a very good study from Diversity Council of Australia, from the Inclusion at Work Index that they did in 2019, 2020. And the question here is, how many people would support inclusion in the Australian workplace? 43% of workers strongly support organizations taking action, and that's gone up from 37% in 2017. 38 male workers were least likely to be strongly supportive. 59% of LGBTQ workers most likely to support strongly, and that went up from 50% in 2017. What I also found interesting is the 3% who strongly oppose organizations taking action, and it's been the same since 2017. So there's still a lot of work to do. But let's go back to my slide. What if we did more to work towards making organizations truly more inclusive? What if we stepped out of our diversity comfort zones? And I use air quotes because I don't think you can ever get comfortable with the work that is involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. But what if we challenged ourselves to be truly inclusive? And an example that I picked here was disability inclusion. What if we were to consider it? Take, for example, employers often don't know where to begin because it is such a vast area. There's so much to consider, from people living with invisible disabilities as well. Let me paint you a better picture from a global perspective and to let you know why it matters. So over 1.3 billion people across the world live with some form of disability. And I got these statistics from the Valuable 500. So feel free to go and check it out when you have a moment or two to spare. Of these people living with disabilities, together with their friends and family, have a spending power of $8 trillion. 80% of disabilities are acquired between the ages of 18 and 64, which is also typically the workforce age. 4% of businesses are focused on making offerings inclusive of disability. So look at the disparity in those numbers. There are more clothing lines for dogs than for disabled people. Isn't that just mind-blowing? I know that you're probably thinking these numbers and statistics probably don't represent what's happening in Australia. So I got some statistics on what living with a disability in Australia means. And 1 in 6 Australians are estimated to have a disability. 1 in 3 Australians have a severe or profound disability. And 15 to 64, the age group of people who are living with disabilities, also participate in the labor workforce. So the numbers, these were from the Australia Government Institute of Health and Welfare, and they were last updated in October 2020. If you know someone or are someone living with a disability, you're probably more familiar with these statistics. Yeah. If you don't, you're probably thinking, where do I even begin, right? It's a lot. And a few things that I was thinking about when I was putting this together is, start small. Where are you on the journey? Figure out, understand what's out there, do the research. Do you have policies that would support employees living with disabilities? What are your recruitment practices like? I'm looking forward to Erin's keynote. I think that's tomorrow, where she's going to talk about hidden biases ruining your D&I recruiting efforts. So that's really interesting. What are your digital accessibility practices? Do you have captions in your Zoom meetings? Do you have alt text in your email images? Do you have accessibility on your career's web pages? And I think Sam spoke about that earlier in his talk about captions for videos as well. Have you thought about that? It seems like a lot if it's relatively new to you, but you have to start somewhere, right? And maybe disability isn't the area that you begin, and that's also okay. Work with your teams, figure out with your teams and your leadership what area you should be prioritizing. I think the important thing more than anything is to start somewhere, Explore via research, ask questions, then start with what you have and go from there. Keep harnessing those practices, policies, because the more you learn, the better you get at providing inclusive solutions for everyone. Because at the end of the day, inclusion benefits everyone. So it's important to acknowledge that it is critical. Stay open. Curiosity is no longer a luxury. It's important to stay plugged into what's happening so that you can deliver the best possible experience, foster inclusive teams, and deliver better value, and keep D&I in your DNA. So no matter how hard it gets, how uncomfortable it is, keep moving. To summarize today, I'll put it all together on this last slide, which is basically the 4 lessons I've just taken you through. So it takes an orchestra to create a symphony. And that translated to employer branding is align with functions that own pieces of the people experience. Establish a soundtrack. What that really means is create a distinct value proposition. Delight your fans. If you think about the Spotify example, remember to check in on the employee experience, not just at the end of the year, but throughout their lifetime there. And then music genres make all the difference. This is just basically me saying inclusion benefits everyone. And that is me for today. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn if you'd like, or answer any questions. I'll be sticking around for the rest of today. Thank you.
Yellow glasses on because I can't see the screen in my fashionable blue ones. That was just, I put up on LinkedIn, it was absolutely sublime, the way that you gave us the 4 learning lessons. And I think actually it's a really lovely way to talk to the business about employer brand in a way that they can understand how important it is. So absolutely and utterly adored that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You turn off your camera. Session. I reached out to the UK, to one of